Thank you very much, Simon. Well, today the world marks Children's Day, and the State of South Africa's Fathers Report was produced by Sonke, Gender Justice, as well as the HSRC. It brings together several narratives on fathers and fatherhood in South Africa and identifies key policies focused on proposals for improving men's involvement in the care of their children. Well, for more on the report and its outcomes, we are joined this evening by Mr. Wessel from Berg from Sonke Gender Justice, as well as the co-author of the State of South Africa's Fathers Report. A very good evening to you, sir. We thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Sonke.
You know, essentially just having a look at that statistic that we had been running on our question of the day, 61% or 61.8% of South Africans, children living under the age of 18 grew up without a father. This is according to the 2017 statistics report. Just take us through what other alarming attributes we found in contributing the report.
You know, the statistic that you've just quoted, it's changed a few times over the last few years, and the alarming fact is actually that we assume that 61 or 64% of children do not have any fatherhood in their lives. That's actually more concerning than the numbers on who's living with whom in the same household. The number is actually that 36% of children live with their biological father in the same household. But as we know, many fathers travel for work, many fathers are non-custodial, and many fathers are not even biological fathers. So there are many opportunities for men to do caregiving, either non-residentially or socially, that we have missed. And that's the point of the report, is that we need to ask more detailed questions about where men are doing it right. Because currently we do know that men are not involved enough in caregiving, but we don't have enough information about that.
Yeah. Take us through the importance of actually having a public, or rather a father figure in the child's life, regardless of whether it's a biological father or whether it's a stepfather or whether it's an uncle that is involved actively in the child's life.
Sure. So currently we know from time use surveys that most of the unpaid care work in the country is done by women. For every 8 hours of unpaid care work that a woman does, a man does only 1 hour of unpaid care work. So one big outcome of getting men involved in that care work is relieving the burden on women. And that's an economic outcome, because that means that women have more time for earning an income. They also have more time for leisure, of course. Today I have just stepped out of a conference we're having at Wits University, hosted by the Center of Excellence on Human Development, about families in South Africa. And you know, it's very clear, the evidence shows us that families are not nuclear families. The most frequent families are extended families. And yet in those families, it's the grannies, the aunts, the mothers who do most of the work. So the main point of our report is to ask the question, how can we get men more involved within those extended networks?
And what about from a social aspect and a psychological aspect, the small things of taking your child to school, of spending a daddy-daughter day with your child?
Yes.
Let's talk about how this affects the actual well-being of a child not growing up or having a father present and participate in the child's life.
Sure. So for girls, we see really good educational outcomes if a father is really involved. For boys, we see less tendency to act out hypermasculine or violent behavior. So fathers spending time with children, regardless of whether it's doing care work or playing or walking them to school or doing homework, have a positive effect on the children's lives. Of course, we know men have very high rates of using violence in South Africa. So this is within the context of men who are playing a positive role in their families.
Yeah, now we know on Monday the Men's Parliament was actually launched yesterday, and this was in aid against the fight of gender-based violence against women and children. How does Sonke Gender Justice support this?
So Sonke has worked since its inception on involving men in combating gender-based violence. But we've been really clear from the beginning that we do that in partnership with women. And I might point out that the Men's Parliament can use more women's voices. Because I think if you talk about gender-based violence against women without women, you are consolidating men's power. So we want to make a call on the Parliament to really remain accountable to the women's rights voices in the country and really consult with women on any strategies that they push for.
Now, how do we break that in terms of the key policies and the proposals that were brought forward? How do we break that cycle of indicating to men their importance and the role that they need to play in their children's lives, and of course as women also to take a step back and allow the men and the fathers in the children's life to also take the role, you know, if they'd want to?
Sure. My perception is that women already take the step back too often, and I would like women to lean in and take the step forward, especially in public spaces where decisions are made. So I would say a strategy to resolve that is to get men who are doing it right to be acknowledged. So if men are doing care work in the household, to really make that visible and to acknowledge that. Of course, women's work is often known as invisible work, and that also needs to be made more visible. So I would say definitely acknowledge women's work, but also focus on what men are doing right. I think if we are spending a lot of time admonishing men for what they're doing wrong, we won't get them to change their behavior.
Now, how do we nurture that? Naturally, as women, we are described as human beings that have a nurturing care to us, whereas with some men, it doesn't come that easily. When some women fall pregnant, they go to classes where they're taught how to, you know, handle an infant, how to talk to an infant, how to respond to an infant. But we find that men are not really inclusive from that in the early beginning stages when a child is brought into this world.
Sure. And that's a constructed reality. That's social. It's not biological. So the State of the World's Fathers, actually, which inspired the State of South Africa's Fathers report, was very clear that there's no biological barrier to men doing the same care work that women do, especially in the early days. Besides pregnancy and breastfeeding, men can do care work as well as women can. I was in a fathers group once, and I heard the voice note about a man calling for preparation for fathers to be fathers. And one of the fathers said, "My wife just instinctively knows how to change a nappy." And it was really funny, but there's that assumption that it is inherent to women, and it's not, it's created.
Yeah. And, you know, Sonke, Gender Justice, if there are men out there who possibly have not been playing a very active or, you know, strong role in their children's life, what word of advice would you give to someone in wanting to take those steps to further be and participate in their children's life if they haven't been and they're feeling guilty?
Sure. I think step one is show up. Just be there. That's the first step. It's a very difficult step because men who have not been involved often ask the question, well, what will I do? But just being there is enough. The interaction with the child then sparks an interaction of some kind. Walking a child to school, just sitting next to them when they do their homework, those are really valuable. We are really happy to have seen the amendments to the Children's Act, sorry, not the Children's Act, the Labour Laws Amendment Act, come through now, where fathers will finally have some parental leave. So we have got 10 days for fathers at birth of a child, and we are waiting for President Ramaphosa to sign off on that. It's gone through the whole parliamentary process. The National Council of Provinces has approved it, and we only await the President's signature. So if he's listening, it would be great if he can sign that, because all new dads that are coming through would then have 10 days of leave accessible to them.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very, very important that fathers are going to be afforded the opportunity to spend time, quality time. And I think that's also, you know, somewhere where we can strike the balance, where some men feel that their contribution in a child's life is through finances. They don't necessarily always realize the importance of actually physically being being present.
No, exactly. And the same theme came up in the conference today at WITS, that men need to pay maintenance if they are not resident or not custodian. Not only men, the non-custodian parent needs to pay maintenance. But we have this narrative of the ATM father, where the father is only the one who gives money and he doesn't spend time with the child. We really want to broaden that and make sure that men understand that they can do much more than only give money. They can also spend time with the child. But it's really important to financially support the child. Otherwise, that burden falls on the mother. Yeah,
you keep mentioning, you know, what was discussed in the forum that took place this afternoon at WITS. Can you take us through some of the other highlights that came up from that?
Sure. So the event is about families in collaboration and contestation with the state. and we had a very exciting launch of the new Child Gauge, which is the annual document on children, and it was purposefully launched on Children's Day today. And the Child Gauge sketches the narrative of especially single mothers who are caring for children and the challenges they face. It also describes how valuable the child support grant are to those mothers, and it also talks about how can we understand that extended families are much more likely to be the norm than the nuclear family. The nuclear family is quite limited in South Africa. It's really a minority of families that are mom, dad, 2 children and a dog. It's mostly extended families, and even with mothers and fathers living in an extended family. So that was a lot of the themes that came up in the conversation today at the conference at Wits.
Definitely. We thank you very much for your time this evening. That was Mr. Wessel van der Berg from Sonke Gender Justice, as well as the co-author of the State of South Africa's Father Report, so just taking us through some of those statistics, as well as fatherhood and absent fathers, as well as present fathers. I'm going to cross over to you, Francis. Something that also affects us as children, as fathers, as women also?
Indeed, and more